Parents spend thousands of my money on my entitled sister's wedding, but I froze the card. For as long as I can remember, my younger sister, Sophia, has been the star of the family. Whether it was school plays, birthdays, or casual family dinners, she always had the spotlight. My parents, while loving, had a habit of overindulging her whims. I, on the other hand, was the responsible child. I worked hard, saved diligently, and rarely asked for help. That dynamic didn't bother me much growing up until it did. A few months ago, my parents and Sophia announced her engagement to her boyfriend of 2 years, Ryan. The news was exciting. At first, Sophia beamed with happiness, and the family celebrated over a lavish dinner. However, I soon noticed that the conversation revolved entirely around extravagant wedding plans. My parents began casually mentioning how Sophia deserved nothing but the best. It sounded harmless at first, but a creeping sense of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. Then came the bombshell. My parents asked if I could temporarily help out with wedding expenses. They justified it by saying I had extra savings, and that Sophia's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. They promised to pay me back. Reluctantly, I agreed. It was my sister's wedding after all, and I didn't want to seem petty. Little did I know what chaos was about to unfold. What started as a promise of temporary help quickly spiraled out of control. At first, my parents only used my credit card for minor expenses: a deposit for the venue, a cake tasting, and some decor. But within weeks, the charges ballooned. Designer dresses, floral arrangements, and a full catering service were all charged to my account. Every time I checked my statements, my heart sank further. I tried to bring up my concerns, but my parents waved them off with reassuring smiles. "It's all under control," they'd say. "We'll pay it back after the wedding. Don't stress." Sophia was no better. She would excitedly show off her custom-made wedding dress and talk about how perfect everything was going to be. Not once did she ask how I felt about footing the bill for her dream wedding. The worst part was the entitlement. When I tried to suggest scaling back some of the expenses, Sophia accused me of being selfish. "It's my special day. Why can't you just be happy for me?" she snapped. My parents, of course, took her side, leaving me feeling like the villain. But I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. One day I received a call from the credit card company. My card had maxed out, and they wanted to verify a $3,500 charge for custom invitations. That was the final straw. I had given my parents access to the card with the expectation that they'd be reasonable, but it was clear they had no intention of stopping. Furious, I confronted them. Their response? A mix of guilt tripping and gaslighting. "Why are you making such a big deal about this?" my mom said, her tone dismissive. "We'll pay you back after the wedding. You're ruining the family vibe by stressing over money." My dad nodded in agreement, adding that this was for Sophia's happiness. Meanwhile, Sophia stayed conveniently quiet, scrolling through her phone. I walked out of that conversation livid. That night, I logged into my credit card account and froze the card. If they wanted to continue their lavish spending, they'd have to figure it out on their own. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not yet. But the fallout was inevitable, and I was ready for it. The next morning, my phone was flooded with calls from my parents. The card had been declined during a payment for Sophia's pre-wedding photo shoot, and they were panicking. I ignored the first few calls, but eventually I picked up. My mom's voice was sharp, tinged with disbelief. "Why is the card frozen? Did you forget to pay the bill?" I calmly explained that I'd frozen the card because it was maxed out, and I was no longer comfortable financing expenses I had never agreed to. My mom exploded, accusing me of sabotaging Sophia's wedding. "Do you realize how this makes us look? The vendor thought we couldn't pay. This is humiliating," she screamed. My dad chimed in, saying I was overreacting and acting immature. Sophia, of course, texted me separately, calling me a selfish, heartless jerk. She claimed I was ruining her big day over something as trivial as money. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. If they wanted the wedding to continue as planned, they'd have to figure it out without me. 2 days later, my parents demanded a family meeting. I reluctantly agreed, knowing full well it would be a guilt-tripping session. We gathered in the living room, with Sophia sitting on the couch like a queen awaiting her subjects. My mom opened the discussion by stating how important family support was during special occasions. I didn't let her finish. "You mean how important my money is?" I shot back. My dad tried to intervene, saying they had every intention of paying me back after the wedding. I asked how, considering they were already struggling with mortgage payments. Silence. That's when Sophia chimed in, calling me bitter and jealous. "You're single, with no big expenses. Why can't you just let me have this?" she whined. I had enough. "This isn't about jealousy, Sophia. It's about boundaries. You've been acting entitled, and Mom and Dad are enabling it. "I'm not your ATM." I got up and walked out, leaving him stunned. The fallout from the meeting was swift and brutal. My parents stopped calling me, and Sophia unfollowed me on all social media. Even extended family members started sending me cryptic messages, implying I was being difficult. The narrative had clearly been twisted. I was the villain ruining Sophia's wedding out of spite. It hurt, but I stood my ground. I reached out to a few close relatives to explain my side of the story. Some were sympathetic, but others told me to just let it go for the sake of peace. It was frustrating how easily people dismissed my financial concerns as trivial. Meanwhile, I started receiving emails from vendors demanding payment. My parents had apparently promised them the charges would be covered. I had to personally call each one to explain that I was no longer responsible for the bills. The embarrassment was overwhelming, but it solidified my resolve. A week later, Sophia showed up at my apartment unannounced. She was furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My wedding is falling apart because of you," she shouted. I stood my ground, reminding her that I wasn't obligated to fund her wedding in the first place. Her tantrum escalated as she accused me of ruining her relationship with Ryan. Apparently, he was starting to question why the family was relying so heavily on me for money. I almost laughed at the irony. "Maybe Ryan is realizing you need to grow up," I said coldly. That pushed her over the edge and she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For the first time, I felt a sense of relief. Sophia's meltdown only confirmed that I had made the right decision. This wasn't about family, it was about entitlement and manipulation. The next day, I received a call from Ryan. I was hesitant to answer, expecting more drama, but to my surprise, he was calm. "I just wanted to apologize," he said. "I didn't realize how much pressure they were putting on you." He admitted he had been kept in the dark about the financial situation and was shocked when he found out how much had been charged to my card. We ended up talking for over an hour. Ryan confessed that he'd been uncomfortable with the lavish wedding plans but hadn't spoken up because Sophia and my parents were so insistent. He assured me he didn't think I was in the wrong. It was refreshing to finally have someone on my side. Before we hung up, Ryan made an offhand comment that stuck with me. "Sophia might not take it well, but maybe this will be a wake-up call for her." I doubted it, but it was nice to hear someone else say what I'd been thinking. My parents, feeling cornered, turned to the extended family for help. Aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins began chiming in, some taking sides, others trying to mediate. It became a full-blown family drama, with group chats and phone calls flying back and forth. Some relatives offered to contribute small amounts to cover the wedding costs, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what Sophia and my parents had already spent. Others scolded my parents for being irresponsible, which only fueled their defensiveness. Sophia, meanwhile, played the victim, claiming I was punishing her out of jealousy. With their finances stretched thin, my parents and Sophia were forced to scale back the wedding plans. The custom invitations were scrapped, the designer dress was replaced with a more affordable option, and the guest list was trimmed significantly. They were furious. But there was no other choice. I heard through the grapevine that Sophia was blaming me for the changes, telling anyone who would listen that I'd ruined her dream wedding. I shrugged it off. If anything, it felt satisfying to see them finally confront reality. Ryan, to his credit, seemed relieved. "Honestly, this is more our speed anyway," he told me during another call. I couldn't help but wonder if he was having second thoughts about marrying into this chaos. The chaos was exhausting, but it also brought some clarity. For the first time, my parents were facing public scrutiny for their actions. It wasn't enough to make them apologize, but it was a start. The bridal shower was meant to be a low-key gathering, especially after the budget cuts. My aunt graciously offered to host it in her backyard, setting up a modest but elegant space with fairy lights and homemade decorations. It wasn't the luxurious affair Sophia had envisioned, but the effort was heartfelt. Most of the guests arrived in good spirits, bearing thoughtful gifts and ready to celebrate. However, Sophia was visibly unimpressed from the moment she arrived. She barely acknowledged anyone's greetings and spent most of the time scrolling through her phone. When it came time to open gifts, her frustration boiled over. I asked for the crystal vase from my registry. She snapped at one guest who had given her a set of hand-painted mugs. The room fell silent, the air thick with awkward tension. My mom tried to smooth things over, but Sophia wasn't done. She made a snide comment about how some people weren't invested enough in her special day. It was obvious she was referring to me, though she didn't say it outright. I bit my tongue, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. The party limped on, but the damage was done. Guests left early, murmuring about Sophia's behavior. Unbeknownst to me, Ryan's parents had been growing increasingly concerned about the escalating wedding drama. They weren't particularly close to my family, but they had heard enough to realize that something wasn't right. A week after the bridal shower, they invited me to lunch, saying they wanted to clear the air. I was hesitant but curious. During lunch, Ryan's mom, Evelyn, was surprisingly direct. "We've been hearing a lot about the wedding, and it seems like you've been carrying most of the burden," she said. I appreciated her honesty and explained my side of the story, sparing no details about the entitlement and financial strain. Evelyn nodded sympathetically, while Ryan's dad, Greg, shook his head in disbelief. Evelyn admitted that they had offered to help with some wedding expenses, but Sophia and my parents had brushed them off, insisting they had it under control. She suggested that I shouldn't feel guilty for stepping back. "It's not your responsibility to fund someone else's dreams," she said firmly. For the first time in weeks, I felt validated. Word must have gotten back to Sophia, because she confronted Ryan about his parents meeting with me. According to Ryan, she was furious that they had gone behind her back and even angrier that they had sided with me. "You're supposed to support me, not my selfish brother," she yelled during their argument. Ryan tried to reason with her, pointing out that the wedding had become unnecessarily extravagant, and that it wasn't fair to put all the financial pressure on me. This only made Sophia angrier. She accused him of not being committed to making her dream wedding a reality. "If you can't even do this for me, how are you going to handle marriage?" she snapped. Their argument escalated to the point where Ryan left for the night, staying at his parents' house to cool off. It was a wake-up call for him. He began to see just how deep Sophia's entitlement ran, and started questioning whether he was ready to marry into this chaos. Meanwhile, Sophia doubled down, refusing to see her role in the situation and blaming everyone but herself. A few days after Sophia and Ryan's argument, my parents made one final attempt to guilt me into unfreezing the card. They invited me over for dinner, a seemingly pleasant gesture, but I knew better. As soon as I walked in, I saw the tension on their faces. My mom wasted no time launching into a rehearsed speech. "This wedding isn't just for Sophia," she said, placing her hand on mine as if to soften the blow. "It's for the whole family. You know how much it means to us to celebrate her happiness." My dad chimed in, claiming I was tearing the family apart by refusing to cooperate. They even tried the nostalgia card, bringing up memories of how I used to protect Sophia when we were kids. But I wasn't swayed. "This isn't about family," I said firmly. "This is about you not respecting my boundaries. You've turned Sophia into someone who thinks the world owes her everything, and I'm done enabling it." My mom's face crumpled, but I didn't waver. I left that night knowing they wouldn't stop trying, but I felt stronger for holding my ground. Ryan called me a few days later, sounding more exhausted than ever. He confessed that the tension with Sophia hadn't eased, and that he was seriously rethinking their future. "I didn't realize how much she's been shielded from reality," he admitted. "This wedding has brought out a side of her I've never seen before." We ended up having an honest conversation about the family dynamics. I explained how my parents had always coddled Sophia, and how it had led to her sense of entitlement. Ryan admitted he had noticed it but thought it was just typical sibling rivalry. "I love her, but I don't know if I can handle this long term," he said quietly. It was clear he was grappling with a difficult decision. Before we hung up, Ryan thanked me for standing up for myself. "I know it's been hell for you, but you're showing her something no one else's consequences." His words stuck with me. For the first time, I realized that my actions weren't just about protecting my finances, they were about breaking a toxic cycle. Sophia, meanwhile, was unraveling. With the wedding only a month away, the scaled-down plans were becoming more and more apparent. She vented her frustration at everyone, from the wedding planner to the florist, but most of her anger was directed at me. During a family gathering, she finally lost it. "You've ruined everything," she screamed in front of everyone. "Do you even care about this family, or is it all about your precious money?" Her dramatic outburst left the room in stunned silence. My parents tried to calm her down, but she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The awkward tension lingered long after she left. A few relatives pulled me aside to quietly offer their support, but others clearly blamed me for the drama. It was exhausting, but I refused to feel guilty. If Sophia wanted to throw tantrums, that was on her. I wasn't going to let her drag me into her spiral. Ryan began pulling away from Sophia in subtle but telling ways. He started spending more time at his parents' house and less time discussing wedding details. When Sophia tried to involve him in last-minute decisions, he was non-committal, clearly tired of the constant drama. This didn't go unnoticed by Sophia. She accused Ryan of being unsupportive and selfish, throwing the same words at him that she had used on me. "If you don't care about this wedding, maybe you don't care about me," she said during one argument, according to Ryan. Her emotional manipulation was starting to backfire, as Ryan grew increasingly frustrated. Ryan confided in me again, saying he was on the verge of calling off the wedding. "I love her, but I don't know if I can spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells," he said. I didn't want to influence his decision, but I couldn't help agreeing. Sophia needed a reality check, and it seemed like it was finally coming. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. The caterer canceled due to non-payment, another vendor left hanging by my parents over promises. Sophia was hysterical, calling me in a rage and demanding I fix it. I calmly reminded her that it wasn't my responsibility and suggested she speak to our parents. The cancellation forced yet another downgrade to the wedding plans. Instead of a catered banquet, they opted for a potluck-style reception. This decision was met with mixed reactions from the family, but there was no other choice. Sophia was livid, and my parents were humiliated. For the first time, they couldn't hide the cracks in their perfect facade. Oddly enough, the potluck idea came from Ryan's mom, Evelyn, who offered to organize it. "It's not what you imagined, but it's still a celebration," she told Sophia. Sophia begrudgingly agreed, but it was clear she saw it as yet another failure. The wedding day arrived, and while it was far from the grand event Sophia had envisioned, it was still beautiful in its simplicity. The potluck reception was held in a community hall, decorated modestly but tastefully. Friends and family pitched in to make it a warm, intimate affair. Sophia, however, couldn't let go of her disappointment. She sulked through most of the day, only forcing smiles for the photos. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed oddly relaxed, even happy. It was as if he had come to terms with the chaos and decided to enjoy the moment for what it was. The tension between Sophia and Ryan was evident, though. When they danced their first dance as a married couple, their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It was bittersweet, a reminder that while the wedding was over, the real challenges were just beginning. The honeymoon was supposed to be Sophia and Ryan's fresh start, but it quickly turned sour. They had originally planned an exotic getaway, but with their depleted funds, they settled for a weekend at a nearby resort. Even then, Ryan later confided that the trip had been a disaster. Sophia spent most of the time complaining about how the wedding didn't meet her expectations. She blamed everyone, me, Ryan, my parents, and even her friends, for not stepping up. Ryan, already exhausted from months of drama, finally snapped. "When are you going to stop blaming everyone else and take some responsibility?" he reportedly yelled during one of their arguments. By the time they returned, cracks in their marriage were already visible. Sophia tried to put on a brave face for family gatherings, but it was clear she wasn't happy. Ryan, meanwhile, avoided my family altogether, choosing to spend time with his own parents instead. A month after the wedding, Ryan called me again. He was at his breaking point. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "She hasn't changed at all. If anything, she's gotten worse." He explained that Sophia was still holding on to resentment about the wedding, and now expected him to make up for it by indulging her every whim. I listened sympathetically but reminded him that he had to decide what was best for him. "You can't force someone to grow up," I said. "Sophia has to want to change, and right now she doesn't see a problem with how she's acting." Ryan thanked me for being honest, though I could tell he was deeply conflicted. It wasn't long before word got around that Ryan had moved back in with his parents temporarily. My parents were devastated, but Sophia acted as if nothing was wrong. She threw herself into her job and social life, trying to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. My parents, clearly sensing the family was fracturing, made another attempt to reconcile with me. They invited me to dinner again, but this time the tone was different. My dad looked visibly tired, and my mom's usual sharpness was replaced with a quieter demeanor. "We just want things to go back to normal," my mom said, her voice almost pleading. She apologized not for the financial strain or their behavior, but for how things turned out. It wasn't the accountability I was hoping for, but it was a start. My dad, too, admitted they had mishandled the situation. "We just wanted the best for Sophia, but we didn't think about the pressure we were putting on you," he said. While I appreciated their words, I knew actions would speak louder. I told them I was open to rebuilding our relationship, but that it would take time. "I'm not angry anymore, but I need you to respect my boundaries moving forward," I said firmly. They nodded, though I wasn't sure if they fully understood. With Ryan staying at his parents' house, Sophia was finally forced to confront the reality of her situation. She tried to downplay the separation at first, telling friends and family that it was just a rough patch, but it was clear she was struggling. My mom started visiting her regularly, worried about her mental state, but even she couldn't ignore Sophia's growing bitterness. Eventually, Ryan filed for a trial separation. The news hit Sophia hard. She called me in tears, something she hadn't done in years. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. For the first time, I heard genuine vulnerability in her voice. she admitted that she had taken Ryan and everyone else for granted. It was a small breakthrough, but it was a step forward. I encouraged her to seek therapy, something she reluctantly agreed to consider. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that she might change. As Sophia began her journey of self-reflection, I focused on rebuilding my relationships with other family members. Some of my relatives who had initially sided with my parents reached out to apologize, admitting they hadn't understood the full extent of the situation. It felt good to clear the air, even if the wounds were still fresh. I also reconnected with Ryan's parents, who remained kind and supportive. They were heartbroken about the separation but hopeful that it might lead to personal growth for both Ryan and Sophia. Evelyn, in particular, became a source of wisdom for me, often reminding me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary for healthy relationships. Though my parents still struggled to fully acknowledge their role in the chaos, our interactions became more civil. I kept my boundaries firm but allowed myself to enjoy the small steps toward reconciliation. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months later, Sophia called me again, this time sounding calmer and more reflective. She had started therapy and admitted that it had been a humbling experience. I didn't realize how much I was hurting the people around me, she said. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. Her apology felt sincere, and while it didn't erase the past, it was enough for me to let go of my lingering resentment. We began to rebuild our relationship slowly, with Sophia making an effort to take responsibility for her actions. It wasn't always easy, but it felt good to finally have an honest connection. As for Ryan, he decided not to reconcile with Sophia, choosing instead to focus on his own happiness. While the divorce was painful, it ultimately allowed both of them to grow in ways they hadn't expected. My parents, too, seemed to learn from the experience, treating me with more respect and understanding moving forward. In the end, the ordeal taught me the importance of standing up for myself, even when it meant facing backlash. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it to finally break free from the cycle of enabling and entitlement.